Commander Valerius Kane stood rigid in the opulent Cygnian diplomatic chamber aboard Ethelberg Station, his expression betraying nothing of the tension coiling inside him. The room's lavish decorations, crystalline sculptures that captured and refracted light in impossible patterns, furniture that seemed to defy gravity, and walls embedded with living bioluminescent organisms, all proclaimed the wealth and technological superiority of the Cygnian people. Before him, Princess Lyra of the Cygnus constellation paced with feline grace, her iridescent skin catching the light with each movement, her silver eyes narrowed in growing frustration. "You fail to understand the urgency of this situation, Commander," she said, her melodic voice hardening. "My shipment contains sensitive diplomatic materials that cannot be subjected to your primitive quarantine procedures." Kane reviewed the preliminary scan data on his neural interface once more. The readings were inconsistent with standard diplomatic cargo. Several biomarkers flagged as potentially hazardous, and the containment protocols appeared to have been tampered with. "With respect, Your Highness," Kane replied, his voice level and controlled. "Station regulations are clear. All incoming cargo must undergo proper quarantine and inspection, particularly when initial scans indicate potential biohazards. I cannot make exceptions, even for diplomatic envoys." Lyra stopped her pacing and turned to face him fully, her 7-foot frame towering over his 6'2". The entourage of Cygnian guards shifted nervously behind her, their elongated fingers resting on ceremonial weapons that Kane knew were anything but ceremonial. "Cannot or will not, Commander," she hissed, stepping closer. "I wonder if your superiors understand how costly this obstinance might be to your station's relationship with the Cygnus Dominion." "I've already consulted with Station Director Halsey," Kane answered calmly. "She supports my assessment. The shipment will remain in quarantine for the standard 72-hour period. If you wish to file a formal diplomatic protest, I can arrange." "Do not patronize me." Lyra's voice rose, her skin flushing to a deeper cobalt blue in anger. "You humans always hide behind your regulations when you simply lack the intelligence to make proper judgments. Your primate brains, barely evolved from swinging in trees, cannot comprehend the delicacy of this situation." Kane remained silent, his face impassive. He had encountered xenophobic sentiment before in his 15 years of service. The Cygnians, with their advanced technology and extended lifespans, were particularly notorious for their superiority complex toward lesser species. Lyra interpreted his silence as weakness and pressed closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "Perhaps I should speak with someone of actual authority, not some lower-order security drone. Your kind are good for physical labor, I suppose, but hardly for thought." Several of her guards exchanged uncomfortable glances. Kane merely maintained eye contact, his steel-gray eyes steady. "My decision stands, Your Highness. If you'd like to discuss alternatives." "Alternatives?" she spat literally. In one fluid motion, Princess Lyra gathered saliva in her mouth and propelled it directly into Kane's face. The thick, slightly luminescent fluid struck his cheek and slid down toward his jaw. The room froze. The Cygnian guards tensed, clearly uncertain whether to intervene. In their culture, such an act was the gravest of insults, a declaration of battle between equals, not something a royal would typically do to a perceived inferior. Kane didn't flinch. Not a muscle moved in his face as the spittle dripped down his cheek. His eyes never left Lyra's, and in them something shifted, not anger, but a cold, professional calculation. What happened next occurred with such swift precision that the Cygnian guards had no time to react. Kane moved forward, his right hand grasping Lyra's wrist and rotating it outward, while his left hand simultaneously activated the energy cuffs he carried. The glowing restraints materialized around her wrists before she could register what was happening. As her mouth opened in shock and outrage, Kane produced a small device from his utility belt and placed it against her lips. It expanded slightly, conforming to her unique Cygnian facial structure and effectively silencing her without impeding her breathing. The gag was a standard-issue speech inhibitor, designed for hostile detainees of various species. The entire sequence took less than 60 seconds. The guards finally moved, reaching for their weapons, but Kane's voice cut through the tension with Arctic authority. Stand down. Your princess has physically assaulted a station security officer, a violation of Neutral Zone Treaty, Section 42B. She's being temporarily restrained according to standard protocol. As the guards hesitated, Kane calmly reached into his pocket, retrieved a sterile wipe, and methodically cleaned his face, never breaking eye contact with the now silenced princess. Her eyes burned with fury and shock, unable to believe that a mere human had dared to handle her royal person. Violation of protocol and assault on station security personnel carries consequences under Interstellar Statute 1138, Kane stated, his voice betraying no emotion whatsoever. You will be detained until appropriate diplomatic channels can address this incident. The diplomatic chamber doors slid open, and an older Cygnian male entered, his ornate robes and the complex patterns of bioluminescence on his skin marking him as a high-ranking official. He surveyed the scene, the restrained and gagged princess, the tense guards, and the impassive human security commander, with an expression that shifted from surprise to something else entirely. Commander Kane, I presume, the older Cygnian said, his voice cultured and measured. Ambassador Thalius. Kane acknowledged with a respectful nod. I apologize for the situation, but Princess Lyra has violated multiple station protocols, culminating in physical assault. To Kane's surprise, Ambassador Thalius, who he now recognized as Lyra's uncle and guardian, did not immediately demand her release. Instead, his silver eyes studied Kane with what appeared to be measured appreciation. I see, the ambassador said, glancing at his niece, whose eyes now pleaded for intervention. And I suppose you acted within your authority as head of station security? Yes, Ambassador. The princess will be held for processing according to. Oh, I'm certain we can find a more diplomatic solution than formal charges, Thalius interrupted, a strange smile playing at his lips. My niece occasionally forgets that royal privilege has its limits, particularly in neutral territory. Lyra made muffled sounds of outrage behind her gag, but her uncle continued as if he couldn't hear her. Perhaps instead of formal detention, which would require unfortunate documentation in official channels, we might arrange a more educational consequence. Kane raised an eyebrow, waiting. I propose that you, Commander Kane, personally serve as Princess Lyra's security escort during her continued stay on Ethelberg, while we resolve the matter of her questionable shipment. This would satisfy security protocols while avoiding an interstellar incident. Kane's expression didn't change, but inwardly he recoiled at the suggestion. Ambassador, with respect, I have numerous security responsibilities that. His neural interface pinged with an incoming message from Director Halsey. Accept the ambassador's proposal. Diplomatic necessity. Full authority granted to investigate cargo. Priority Alpha. Kane suppressed a sigh. I would be honored to serve as the princess's security detail until this matter is resolved, he said, knowing full well the diplomatic mess he was being thrown into. Ambassador Thalius smiled, revealing teeth that were just a bit too sharp for comfort. Excellent. You may remove the speech inhibitor now, Commander. I'm certain my niece has learned a valuable lesson about respecting authority in neutral territories. Kane stepped forward and deactivated the gag. As it retracted, Lyra immediately began a tirade in her native language, which Kane's translator struggled to keep up with. The general meaning, however, involved numerous creative suggestions about what Kane could do with various parts of his anatomy. The energy restraints will remain until I'm confident the princess understands the parameters of her restricted movement on the station, Kane stated firmly, ignoring the verbal assault. Quite reasonable, Ambassador Thalius agreed, switching to English that was so perfect it suggested extensive time spent among humans. Lyra, you will cooperate with Commander Kane, or I will personally contact your mother, the Queen Regent, about your behavior. That threat silenced Lyra more effectively than any technological device. She glared at both men, but gave a curt nod. I'll expect a full briefing on the contents of her shipment, Kane said to the ambassador. Of course, Thalius replied, though something in his tone suggested Kane wouldn't be receiving the whole truth. I look forward to seeing how you handle my niece, Commander. Few have managed it with such decisive efficiency. As the ambassador departed, Kane turned to Lyra, whose silver eyes burned with murderous intent. Shall we establish the ground rules for our time together? Your Highness, he asked, his voice neutral. I will destroy you for this humiliation, she whispered, each syllable dripping with aristocratic venom. Kane simply nodded as if she'd made a reasonable comment about the station's artificial weather. Threatening station personnel, noted. That's another violation of Section 43C. Shall we continue accumulating infractions, or would you prefer to tour your temporary accommodations? Lyra's face contorted with fury, but she remained silent as Kane escorted her from the diplomatic chamber, the beginning of what promised to be the most challenging assignment of his career. The quarters assigned to Princess Lyra were luxurious by station standards, but clearly fell short of Cygnian royal expectations. Kane watched impassively as she examined the spacious suite with visible disdain, running a slender blue finger along the surface and inspecting it as if expecting to find primitive human filth. Your control center cannot even maintain proper quantum alignment in the environmental systems, she commented, gesturing toward the ceiling. The phase variance is at least 0.03 microshifts. Do you expect me to breathe such poorly calibrated air? Kane accessed his neural interface. Station records indicate these quarters are maintained at optimal conditions for Cygnian physiology, as specified by your own embassy. Optimal for common Cygnians, perhaps, Lyra sniffed. Royal physiology has different requirements. I'll request a technician to review the settings, Kane replied evenly, though they both knew it was a meaningless complaint designed to assert her superiority. And I require Stellaris crystal water, not this molecular reconstructed waste your station calls hydration. Stellaris crystal water is not available on Ethelberg. All water aboard is purified through molecular reconstruction, as you called it. It meets or exceeds standards for all known sentient species. Lyra dropped dramatically onto a seating platform, which adjusted to her form. I will die of thirst, then. You may explain to the Dominion how your barbaric conditions killed their princess. Kane maintained his composure. The station commissary has a selection of Cygnian beverages imported last month. I can arrange for a delivery. Last month. Lyra's voice rose an octave. You expect royalty to consume common market exports more than 7 rotations old? The degradation of molecular perfection would be, your options are limited to what's available on the station, Your Highness. Unless your diplomatic vessel happens to carry a supply of suitably fresh royal beverages. Lyra narrowed her eyes, clearly suspecting a trap. My ship supplies are not subject to your inspection without specific diplomatic clearance. True, Kane conceded. But if you wish to access those supplies, we would need to arrange a supervised visit to your vessel, which remains in quarantine. All items removed would then be subject to standard screening. This is imprisonment, she declared, rising to her feet. This is standard procedure following an assault on station personnel, Kane corrected her. You're being accommodated with considerable leniency. They continued in this vein for hours. Lyra demanded special foods, custom lighting spectra, communication access to restricted channels, and the removal of the offensive human security personnel stationed outside her door. Kane addressed each demand according to protocol, accommodating those within regulations, firmly declining those that weren't, and ignoring the increasingly creative insults she wove into her requests. By station evening cycle, a pattern had emerged. Lyra would make an outrageous demand. Kane would calmly explain the station's limitations. She would threaten diplomatic consequences, and he would silently log the exchange while maintaining his composed demeanor. The energy restraints had been removed after the first 2 hours. Once she had demonstrated she wasn't immediately going to attempt another assault, but Kane remained vigilant. During dinner, which featured several accommodations for Cygnian dietary preferences. Though Lyra pretended each bite was torture, Kane observed the princess more carefully. Behind her imperious demands and casual cruelty, he detected something else, a tension that went beyond mere frustration at being detained. Her eyes darted occasionally to the chronometer, and several times she began to ask about her shipment before catching herself. Whatever was in that cargo hold, it genuinely concerned her. As she picked at her food, Kane decided to take a more direct approach. "Your Highness, why is this particular shipment so urgent that you would risk a diplomatic incident?" Lyra froze momentarily, then continued eating as if she hadn't heard the question. "The standard quarantine procedure exists for good reason," Kane continued. "In the station's 30-year history, it has prevented 17 major biological contaminations and 3 attempts to smuggle prohibited weapons technology." "How dare you imply?" Lyra began, but Kane cut her off. "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts about why these procedures exist. If your cargo is genuinely diplomatic materials, it will clear quarantine in 72 hours with no issues." Lyra set down her eating utensils with precise movements. "You cannot possibly understand the complexities of Cygnian internal politics, Commander." "Try me," Kane said simply. Something in his tone, perhaps the complete absence of condescension, caused Lyra to actually really look at him, perhaps for the first time. Their eyes met across the table, and Kane had the strange sensation of being assessed on a level beyond the visual. "There are factions," she finally said, clearly choosing her words with care, "within the Dominion that would not be pleased with certain aspects of my mission here. Rival royal houses?" Lyra's surprise at his knowledge of Cygnian political structure was evident. "Among others, the House of Talanis has been particularly vocal about my family's approach to interspecies relations." Kane nodded. "The Talanisian faction advocates for genetic purity and minimal contact with non-Cygnian species. They've been gaining influence in your Parliament of Stars for the past decade." "You are unexpectedly informed about our politics," Lyra admitted reluctantly. "It's my job to understand potential threats to station security, including political tensions that might play out on Ethelberg." A small silence fell between them, subtly different from the hostile atmosphere that had dominated their interaction thus far. "The contents of my shipment," Lyra finally continued, "would be valuable to those who oppose my family's moderate stance. That is all I can say without breaching confidentiality." Kane processed this information, noting both what she said and what she deliberately omitted. "Thank you for that context, Your Highness. It helps me understand your urgency, though it doesn't change the required protocols." Lyra opened her mouth to object, then surprisingly closed it again. "I find your rigid adherence to principles simultaneously primitive and admirable," she said, as if the admission pained her. "Few in the royal court value consistency over opportunity." It was as close to a compliment as Kane expected to receive, and he acknowledged it with a slight nod. The rest of the meal passed with marginally less hostility, though Lyra still managed to work in several references to humanity's evolutionary shortcomings. That night, as Lyra finally retired to the sleeping chamber and Kane prepared to hand off surveillance to the night security team, his neural interface pinged with an encrypted message from Director Halsey. Preliminary scans of Cygnian vessel complete. Anomalous bioactive materials detected. Origin signatures match prohibited research facility on Cygnus 4. Full analysis in 48 hours. Maintain close observation of subject. Trust no one from diplomatic corps. Kane frowned slightly. The message confirmed his suspicions that there was more to the princess's cargo than diplomatic materials, but the reference to Cygnus 4 was particularly troubling. That research station had been officially decommissioned after producing several banned bioweapons 5 standard years ago. What exactly was Princess Lyra transporting? And why was her own uncle, the ambassador, seemingly unconcerned about her detention? Kane settled into the security station outside Lyra's quarters, preparing for a long night. He'd need to conduct his own investigation, quietly and carefully, without alerting either the princess or, apparently, her diplomatic entourage. The situation had just become significantly more complicated than a simple matter of a spoiled royal spitting in his face. The following morning cycle, Kane escorted Princess Lyra to the station's diplomatic reception area, where Ambassador Thalius had requested a meeting. The princess had been surprisingly subdued, requesting only minimal accommodations for her morning rituals and limiting her insults to an occasional muttered comment about primitive human timekeeping and the barbaric quality of synthetic fabric in her temporary wardrobe. Kane suspected she was conserving her energy for whatever awaited in the diplomatic meeting. Her posture was tense, her normally iridescent skin slightly duller than the previous day, signs of stress that his training in xenobiology helped him identify. As they entered the reception area, a spacious chamber designed to accommodate various physiological needs of different species, Kane noticed several concerning details. First, Ambassador Thalius was accompanied by two Cygnian security officers Kane hadn't seen before, their uniforms bearing subtle differences from the standard diplomatic guards. Second, the ambassador himself appeared uncharacteristically nervous, his elongated fingers repeatedly adjusting the ceremonial chain around his neck. "Niece, Commander," Thalius greeted them, his voice overly bright. "I trust you had a restful cycle?" Lyra didn't answer, her silver eyes fixed on the new guards with unmistakable suspicion. "Who are your new escorts, Uncle?" she asked finally, her voice carefully neutral. "I don't recognize them from our convoy." "Ah, additional security provided by the High Council," Thalius said with a dismissive wave. Given the sensitivity of your cargo, they felt additional protection was warranted. Kane noticed the subtle shift in Lyra's stance, a nearly imperceptible stiffening that suggested this information was both unexpected and unwelcome. "The High Council wasn't informed of this diplomatic mission," she said quietly. "It was authorized directly by the Queen Regent." The air in the room seemed to thicken with tension. Ambassador Thalius's smile became fixed, and the two new guards subtly shifted their positions, hands moving closer to their weapons. Kane's neural interface pinged with an automated alert. Asterisk weapons energy signature detected. Non-standard issue. Potential threat level. High. Asterisk. "I believe," Kane interjected smoothly, "there may be some confusion about protocol. All security personnel must be registered with Station Command before being permitted in diplomatic areas." "A minor oversight," Thalius replied, his tone hardening slightly. "These officers arrived on the supply shuttle this morning. The registration is being processed." "No supply shuttle has docked since yesterday," Kane said, his right hand casually shifting toward his sidearm. "Perhaps you'd like to clarify, Ambassador?" Time seemed to freeze for a fraction of a second, and then everything happened at once. The false guards drew their weapons, energy pistols that hummed with a frequency Kane immediately recognized as illegal sonic disruptors designed to target Cygnian and human nervous systems. Ambassador Thalius lunged backward, clearly trying to distance himself from what was about to happen. Kane didn't hesitate. He shoved Lyra behind him with his left arm while simultaneously drawing his service weapon with his right. His first shot caught the guard on the left directly in the chest, sending him sprawling backward. The second guard managed to fire, but Kane had already pulled Lyra down behind a decorative pillar, the energy blast sizzling over their heads. "Stay down," Kane ordered, risking a glance around the column to assess the situation. The second attacker was advancing, using Ambassador Thalius as a shield. The ambassador's face was a mask of terror. Whether genuine or performed, Kane couldn't tell. "Surrender the princess and the cargo authorization codes," the attacker demanded, his accent marking him as from the outer Cygnian colonies. "Do this, and you may live, human." Kane didn't reply. Instead, he evaluated his options, calculating trajectories and risks with the cool precision that had earned him his position. The standard-issue neural dampener in his sidearm would temporarily disable a Cygnian without lasting damage, but with Thalius in the way, he needed a perfect shot. To his surprise, Lyra whispered from behind him, "When I move, take the shot." Before he could question her, The princess produced a small device from within her clothing, a personal shield projector, he realized, prohibited on most neutral stations due to their interference with security systems. She activated it and suddenly darted from behind the pillar, creating a diversion. The attacker's attention split for just a millisecond, but it was enough. Kane fired, the neural pulse striking the false guard in the exposed neck area above his armor. The Signian convulsed and collapsed, his weapon clattering to the floor. Ambassador Thalius immediately began sputtering explanations. "Commander, I had no idea. These men approached me claiming to be from the Royal Security Detail. I would never—" Silence. Lyra's voice cracked like a whip. "Uncle, you will explain yourself fully, but not here." She turned to Kane. "Commander, I believe we have a mutual security concern. These men are Talonesian operatives. They're after my shipment." Kane nodded, already accessing station security through his neural interface. Security lockdown initiated. Medical team en route. He gestured to the fallen attackers. "These two will be interrogated once they're secured." "They won't talk," Lyra said grimly. "Talonesian agents undergo mental conditioning against interrogation." "Station has methods," Kane replied simply, watching as Ambassador Thalius seemed to shrink under his niece's glare. "Uncle," Lyra said, her voice suddenly royal in its authority, "you will return to your quarters under guard. Your communications will be restricted until I determine your level of involvement in this incident." Thalius began to protest, but the cold fury in Lyra's eyes silenced him. Kane was seeing yet another side of the princess, not the spoiled royal or the frustrated diplomat, but a commander accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Commander Kane," she continued, turning to him, "I believe it's time I told you exactly what my shipment contains and why the Talonesian faction is willing to commit acts of terrorism to acquire it." Kane nodded, his expression serious. "My office would be secure for that conversation." As they left the reception area, now swarming with station security personnel, Kane noticed something unexpected. Princess Lyra was walking close beside him, almost protectively, her earlier disdain apparently forgotten in the wake of their shared danger. Even more surprising, he found himself equally vigilant for her safety, his instincts responding to her not as a difficult diplomatic charge, but as someone under his protection. It was a subtle shift, but in Kane's experience, such shifts often preceded the most significant changes in trajectory, both in security situations and in personal interactions. The door to Kane's office sealed with a soft hiss, the security protocols activating automatically. The space was Spartan by Signian standards. Functional furniture, holographic displays showing station security feeds, and a single window overlooking the vast docking bay where distant figures moved about their duties like miniature automatons. Lyra paced the small room, her usual grace hampered by evident anxiety. Kane waited patiently, giving her space to gather her thoughts. Whatever she was about to reveal clearly weighed heavily on her. "What I'm about to tell you," she finally began, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant, "violates at least 3 interstellar treaties and could potentially end my house's 5th-century rule of the Cygnus Dominion." Kane's expression remained neutral, though inwardly his alert level elevated. "I understand the seriousness, Your Highness." "I doubt that you do," she replied, but without her usual condescension. "My shipment contains genetically unstable Signian specimens, failed experiment from a research initiative my mother authorized in violation of the Genetic Sovereignty Accords." Kane's mind raced through the implications. The Accords, established after the devastating Helios gene wars, strictly prohibited advanced species from manipulating their own genetic code beyond specified therapeutic purposes. The penalty for violations could include galactic quarantine or, in extreme cases, targeted biomolecular sanctions that could affect an entire species. The experiments were attempting to reactivate dormant neural pathways, Lyra continued, her back to him as she gazed out the window. Pathways that, according to ancient texts, once gave our ancestors abilities that your kind would consider supernatural. Psionic capabilities, Kane surmised, recalling classified intelligence briefings about rumored Signian research. Lyra turned, her silver eyes widening slightly. You know of this? I know that several advanced species are believed to have once possessed heightened neural capabilities that atrophied as technology developed. Telepathy, telekinesis, heightened empathic sense. Abilities that became evolutionary disadvantages once technological alternatives existed. Precisely, Lyra confirmed. The Talonesian faction believes that reactivating these abilities is key to asserting Signian superiority in the galaxy. My family has officially opposed this research for generations, advocating instead for cooperative advancement among species. But unofficially, Kane let the implication hang in the air. Unofficially, my mother authorized limited research, convinced that the Talonesians were making progress in secret. Her intention was defensive, to understand the potential threat, not to deploy it. Kane processed this information. The experiments failed. Catastrophically, Lyra confirmed, a shadow crossing her face. The test subjects, volunteers from loyal houses, developed unstable mutations. Some died. Others experienced worse fates. The project was terminated, but the genetic samples and research data remained in a secure facility on Cygnus 4. Until you were sent to retrieve and dispose of them, Kane concluded, before the Talonesians could seize them. Lyra nodded. My ship contains the last existing samples and the complete research database. I was to rendezvous with a specialized disposal vessel in the Outer Reach, where everything would be destroyed beyond recovery. And your uncle? Thalius has always maintained connections with multiple factions. I suspected he might have divided loyalties, but not that he would actively betray me to Talonesian agents. Her voice hardened. A miscalculation I won't repeat. Kane moved to his console and pulled up the quarantine data on Lyra's ship. The preliminary scans detected biomatter with unusual properties. Your cargo containers must be leaking trace elements. Alarm flashed across Lyra's features. That shouldn't be possible. The containment is absolute, quantum-sealed and phase-locked. Yet our sensors detected something, Kane insisted. If those containers are compromised. A station-wide alert suddenly blared through the room, cutting him off mid-sentence. The security feeds on his monitors shifted to show the docking bay, where Lyra's ship was quarantined. Multiple figures in environmental suits were forcing entry into the vessel. Talonesian agents, Lyra hissed, moving closer to the screen. They must have had a backup plan if the assassination failed. Kane was already activating his emergency protocols, simultaneously contacting station security and checking the nearest weapons cache. We need to get to your ship before they access the cargo. If they obtain even a single viable sample. Lyra didn't finish the thought, but the gravity of her expression completed it for her. We'll take maintenance access tunnels, Kane decided, retrieving an additional sidearm from a hidden compartment in his desk. They'll be watching the main corridors. As they prepared to leave, Kane noticed Lyra studying him with an unreadable expression. You believe me, she stated, sounding slightly surprised. Without evidence or verification, Kane checked his weapons efficiently. I believe the threat is real, based on the attack we just survived. The rest can be sorted out after we secure the ship. Most humans would hesitate to trust a Signian who had recently. She trailed off. Spat in their face? Kane finished for her, the ghost of a smile touching his lips for the first time in their acquaintance. I'm not most humans, Your Highness. No, she agreed softly. You most certainly are not. The maintenance tunnels of Ethelberg Station formed a labyrinthine network, narrow, dimly lit passages designed for service droids and occasional human technicians. For Kane, they were familiar territory. He had memorized the station's complete layout years ago as part of his security protocols. For Princess Lyra, however, they represented an uncomfortable new experience, cramped, undignified, and decidedly unroyal. Yet she followed Kane without complaint, her earlier hauteur seemingly forgotten in the urgency of their mission. Occasionally, her traditional Signian robes caught on protruding equipment, but she simply tore the expensive fabric free and continued without comment. "These passages are remarkably complex," she observed as they navigated a particularly convoluted section. "Almost organic in their layout. The station was built in phases over decades," Kane explained, his voice low. "Each section reflects different design philosophies and technological eras. The maintenance system grew organically to accommodate these differences. Not unlike evolution itself," Lyra mused. "Adaptation rather than intelligent design." Kane glanced back at her, somewhat surprised by the philosophical observation. An apt comparison. They moved in silence for several minutes, the distant sounds of the station's operations creating a mechanical ambience around them. Kane's neural interface continuously updated him on the situation. The intruders had breached Lyra's ship and were currently attempting to access the secure cargo hold. Station security was responding, but had been delayed by a series of false alarms in other sectors, clearly a diversionary tactic. "We're approaching Junction 17B, Kane informed Lyra. "From there, we can access a service elevator that leads directly to the quarantine docking bay. We'll need to move quickly. The elevator's emergency use will trigger automated alerts." Lyra nodded, then suddenly froze, her head tilting as if listening to something beyond human hearing range. "Wait," she whispered, reaching out to grasp Kane's arm. "There's something." Kane immediately halted, his senses heightening. Years of security work had taught him to trust the instincts of those whose perceptive abilities differed from human norms. A moment later, he heard it too, a faint scraping sound from the tunnel ahead, too rhythmic to be mechanical and too deliberate to be ambient noise. "Someone's in the maintenance shaft," he murmured, drawing his sidearm. The tunnel branched just ahead, with their planned route continuing straight while a secondary passage veered to the right. Kane gestured for Lyra to stay behind him as they cautiously approached the junction. The scraping grew louder, and now Kane could distinguish the sound more clearly. Someone unfamiliar with the tunnels, moving clumsily through the narrowed spaces. Likely not station personnel, who would move with practiced efficiency. At the junction, Kane paused, then made a split-second decision. He gestured for Lyra to take the right branch while he continued forward, creating a tactical advantage if they needed to flank whoever approached. Lyra hesitated only briefly before complying, moving with surprising stealth for someone unaccustomed to such environments. Kane advanced slowly, his weapon ready, his breathing controlled and silent. The figure that emerged from the shadows ahead wore a Cygnian environmental suit with unofficial modifications, tactical enhancements that marked them as military rather than scientific personnel. The intruder carried a specialized scanning device, sweeping it methodically across the tunnel surfaces. Tracking them, Kane realized. The scanner was likely calibrated to detect Cygnian biosignatures, which explained how they had found this particular maintenance route. The intruder paused, the scanner emitting a soft pulse that indicated detection. They looked up directly toward Kane's position, raising a weapon. Kane fired first, the neural disruptor striking center mass. The Talonesian agent convulsed but remained standing, protected by some form of dampening field in their suit. They returned fire, the energy blast scorching the wall inches from Kane's head. Before either could fire again, a blur of motion erupted from the right junction. Princess Lyra, moving with the natural speed and grace of her species. She struck the intruder from behind, her hand wielding a piece of metal broken from the tunnel infrastructure. The improvised weapon connected with the vulnerable neck seal of the environmental suit, causing the agent to stagger. Kane seized the momentary advantage, closing the distance and employing a precision strike to the neural cluster at the base of the Cygnian skull, one of the few universally effective disabling points across most humanoid species. The agent collapsed, unconscious. "That was impressive," Kane acknowledged, securing the fallen intruder's weapon. "I received combat training from childhood," Lyra replied, slightly breathless. "All Royal House members do. Though I admit, applying those skills in a maintenance tunnel was not covered in my lessons." A ghost of a smile crossed Kane's face. "Adaptation rather than design?" Lyra's lips curved in response, creating a moment of unexpected connection between them. The shared danger had stripped away pretense, leaving something more authentic in its place. The moment ended as Kane's neural interface pulsed with an urgent alert. "They've breached the primary containment on your ship," he informed Lyra, his voice returning to its professional cadence. "We need to move now." They left the unconscious agent secured with energy restraints and continued their journey through the maintenance tunnels with increased urgency. When they reached the service elevator, Kane overrode the security protocols with his command authorization. "This will alert security to our position," he warned as the elevator doors slid open. "Will they try to stop us?" Lyra asked, stepping inside the small compartment. "No, but it will create a record of our movements. If there are more Talonesian agents with access to station systems, they'll know exactly where we're headed." The elevator descended rapidly, the hum of its mechanism the only sound as they prepared themselves for whatever awaited. Kane checked his weapon once more, while Lyra stood tall, her posture reflecting years of royal discipline. "Commander," she said suddenly, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant, "if we encounter significant resistance, do not risk yourself unnecessarily. The contents of that shipment are my responsibility." Kane looked at her directly. "On this station, everyone's safety is my responsibility, including yours, Your Highness." The doors opened onto the quarantine docking bay, a vast space currently bathed in the flashing red of emergency protocols. Lyra's ship, an elegant vessel with a distinctive curved architecture of Signian design, was surrounded by warning barriers, its entry ramp extended. "3 intruders confirmed inside," Kane reported, reading the data streaming through his neural interface. "Station security is maintaining a perimeter but awaiting specialized hazmat teams before entering, due to potential biological contamination." "We don't have time for protocols," Lyra stated firmly. "The inner containment vessels have redundant security, but if they're already compromised..." Kane made a quick decision. "There's an emergency equipment locker near the security checkpoint. We can obtain hazmat gear there." They moved swiftly across the docking bay, keeping to the shadows of larger cargo containers. The checkpoint was minimally staffed, with most security personnel deployed around the perimeter of Lyra's ship. "Commander Kane," the junior officer manning the checkpoint acknowledged with surprise. "We were told you were coordinating from Central Security." "Change of plans," Kane replied smoothly. "We need 2 Class A hazmat suits immediately." The officer hesitated, glancing at Lyra. "Sir, I have orders to maintain containment protocols. No one is authorized to approach the vessel until the specialist team arrives." "Override authorization, Kane. 7-9, Alpha," Kane stated firmly. "This is a Level 1 security matter with diplomatic implications. Time is critical." The young officer wavered, clearly caught between protocols and a direct order from his superior. "Officer," Lyra interjected, her voice carrying the unmistakable command of royal authority, "your station faces a threat of interstellar proportions. Every moment of delay increases that threat exponentially." Something in her tone, perhaps the absolute certainty or the absence of her earlier condescension, seemed to resolve the officer's conflict. He nodded once and unlocked the equipment locker. "The suits have standard 30-minute oxygen supplies," he explained, professional training taking over. "Emergency decontamination protocols can be activated from any station panel." Minutes later, Kane and Lyra approached the Signian vessel, encased in the bulky environmental suits. The translucent helmets restricted peripheral vision, and the gloves reduced tactile sensation, but they provided essential protection against whatever biological agents might have been released. 3 life signs detected inside, Kane reported, reading the scanner built into his suit. 1 in the cargo hold, 2 moving toward the bridge. "The cargo hold is our priority," Lyra confirmed. "The research materials are stored in a secured compartment beneath the primary deck plates." They entered through the main airlock, the ship's interior illuminated only by emergency lighting that cast long, distorted shadows. The elegant curves and organic-seeming architecture typical of Cygnian vessels now seemed ominous, hiding potential threats in their sweeping arcs and recessed alcoves. Kane took the lead, his movements precise and economical despite the cumbersome suit. Lyra followed closely, navigating the familiar layout of her vessel with practiced ease. As they approached the cargo hold, Kane detected unusual energy readings emanating from ahead. Something's generating a significant power signature in the hold, he whispered, though the suit's communication system made whispering unnecessary. Not standard Cygnian technology. They must have brought equipment to transfer the samples, Lyra replied, alarm evident in her voice. If they've already extracted them from containment. A sudden explosion of sound and motion interrupted her. A Talonesian agent in partial hazmat gear emerged from a side passage, firing a disruptor weapon. The energy blast struck Kane's suit, the dispersal field absorbing much of the impact, but still sending him staggering backward. Lyra reacted instantly, using the momentum of Kane's backward movement to pivot herself forward, directly toward the attacker. The move was so unexpected that the agent hesitated momentarily, all the opening Lyra needed. She struck with precision, targeting the exposed, breathing apparatus of the agent's incomplete protective gear. The Talonesian staggered, gasping as his air supply was compromised. Kane recovered his balance and moved forward, disarming the agent with a swift strike and securing him with restraints from his utility belt. "You've been practicing combat maneuvers since I last saw you fight," Kane observed, a note of approval in his voice. "I've been observing you," Lyra corrected. "Your human combat techniques are surprisingly effective in their simplicity." They continued toward the cargo hold, moving with greater caution after the encounter. The hold's main entrance was sealed with an emergency force field, standard quarantine protocol, but in this case likely activated by the intruders to protect themselves while they worked. "My access codes should override this," Lyra said, approaching the control panel. As she entered the complex sequence, Kane studied the energy readings more carefully. "There's something wrong with the pattern," he noted. "It's fluctuating in a non-standard sequence." Lyra finished the entry code, and the force field flickered but remained in place. "They've modified the security protocols," she realized. "We need to—" The rest of her sentence was lost as the ship suddenly trembled around them, the deck plates vibrating with increasing intensity. "That's not weapons fire," Kane stated, checking his readings. "It's coming from inside the cargo hold. Some kind of energy buildup." Lyra's expression behind her helmet visor shifted to one of horror. The containment vessels, if they tried to force them open without proper sequencing, they could trigger a cascading molecular destabilization. "In human terms?" Kane asked, already accessing emergency protocols through his neural interface. "A localized biogenic explosion that could spread unstable Cygnian genetic material throughout this section of the station," Lyra explained grimly. "Potentially affecting any compatible DNA structures it encounters." Kane made an instant decision. "We need a manual override. Is there another entry point?" "The emergency access hatch in the deck," Lyra confirmed, already moving toward a specific section of flooring. "It bypasses the main security systems." They quickly located the hidden panel, which Lyra activated with a precise sequence of pressure points. A section of the deck retracted, revealing a narrow passage downward. "I'll go first," Kane insisted. "Stay behind me and be ready to seal this hatch if something goes wrong." Before Lyra could object, he had already lowered himself into the opening. She followed immediately after, her movements fluid despite the awkward environmental suit. The lower level of the cargo hold was dominated by a central platform where several containment vessels glowed with an eerie blue light. A lone figure hunched over a complex device attached to one of the vessels, which was emitting erratic pulses of energy that distorted the air around it. The Talonesian agent was so focused on his work that he didn't notice their arrival until Kane had already closed half the distance between them. When he finally looked up, his eyes widened behind his protective mask. "Stop immediately," Kane commanded. "You're destabilizing the containment field." "It's too late," the agent replied, his voice distorted by his breathing apparatus. The process has begun. The pure future of the Cygnian race will rise from this catalyst. Lyra stepped forward, her royal authority evident even in the bulky hazmat suit. You fool. These samples are flawed. They contain degenerative mutations that destroyed the test subjects. This isn't the key to Cygnian advancement. It's a path to our extinction. The agent's laugh was chilling. Propaganda from a royal house too weak to embrace evolution. The Talanesian scientists have already corrected the flaws. We only need the original material to complete the work. As he spoke, the containment vessel's pulsing intensified, and warning indicators throughout the cargo hold began flashing red. The ship's automated voice announced, "Biohazard containment failure imminent. Emergency protocols activated." Kane assessed the situation in split seconds. The Talanesian device was connected to the containment vessel by several cables, apparently designed to extract and transfer the biological materials. Disconnecting it improperly could accelerate the destabilization. The transfer device, Lyra said urgently. It's using a modified quantum sequencer to break the molecular locks. If we reverse the polarity of the main coupling, it could re-establish containment, Kane finished, already moving toward the apparatus. His security training had included basic understanding of quantum containment systems, though Cygnian technology was significantly more advanced than human equivalents. The Talanesian agent moved to intercept him, drawing a specialized cutting tool that could easily breach a hazmat suit. You will not interfere with Cygnian destiny. What happened next occurred so quickly that later, Kane would have difficulty recounting the exact sequence. The agent lunged toward him with the cutting tool. Lyra intervened, placing herself between them. The tool made contact with her suit, and there was a brief, terrible hiss of escaping air. Kane reacted instinctively, neutralizing the agent with a precise strike to the neural cluster at the base of his skull, just as he had done with the agent in the maintenance tunnel. As the Talanesian collapsed, Kane turned immediately to Lyra, whose suit now had a visible breach across the chest section. "The containment vessel first," she insisted, her voice steady despite the catastrophic breach in her protection. "We have minutes before total failure." Fighting against every instinct that screamed at him to address her injury first, Kane turned to the quantum sequencer. Following Lyra's rapid instructions, he reconfigured the polarity couplings and rerouted the energy flow. The device hummed, its tone changing from an erratic pulse to a more stable resonance. The containment vessel's glow steadied, and the warning alarms throughout the ship began to silence one by one. Containment re-established, the ship's voice announced. "Biohazard status, contained but unstable. Recommend immediate specialized handling protocols." Only then did Kane turn his full attention to Lyra, who stood perfectly still, her posture rigid with the knowledge of what the breach in her suit meant. The exposure, Kane began, already accessing emergency medical protocols through his neural interface, "is guaranteed," Lyra finished for him, a strange calm in her voice. "I've been exposed to the unstable genetic material. There's no established treatment." Kane refused to accept this conclusion. The station has advanced medical facilities, decontamination protocols, genetic stabilizers. For known contaminants, Lyra corrected him gently. "This is experimental Cygnian material designed to alter our specific genetic structure. The effects on royal Cygnian physiology are documented in the research data, and they are not survivable." The stark reality of her words hit Kane with physical force. This poised, brilliant being before him, who had moved from adversary to ally in the space of hours, who had just saved his life at the cost of her own, was facing an inevitable and horrific fate. There must be something, he insisted, the professional detachment that had defined his career suddenly fragile in the face of this unexpected loss. Lyra reached up and, to his shock, removed her helmet entirely. Her silver eyes met his through his visor, more luminous than ever. "There is one possibility," she said, her voice taking on a formal quality that spoke of ancient Signian traditions. "But it would require something from you that no human has ever been asked to give." Before she could explain further, Kane's neural interface blazed with urgent alerts. Station security had finally breached the outer doors of the ship. Emergency medical teams were en route. The unstable biological materials, while contained, still presented a significant threat. "Whatever it is," Kane said without hesitation, "I'll do it." The next few hours passed in a blur of emergency protocols, quarantine procedures, and tense negotiations between station authorities and the Signian Diplomatic Corps. Kane and Lyra were separated for decontamination, though Kane's suit had remained intact, sparing him from direct exposure. Station Director Halsey herself oversaw the operation, coordinating with both Federation authorities and Signia medical experts who were being rushed to Ethelberg on emergency transports. "The princess's condition is stable for now," Dr. Eleanor Phillips, the station's chief medical officer, reported in the secure briefing room where Kane waited after his decontamination process. "But the exposed genetic material is already showing signs of integration with her cellular structure. The Signian experts estimate she has perhaps 72 hours before critical degradation begins." Kane absorbed this information with outward calm, though internally a storm was brewing. In the space of a day, Princess Lyra had transformed from an arrogant diplomatic problem to someone he respected, admired, and now, inexplicably, felt responsible for in a way that transcended professional duty. "She mentioned a possibility," he said to Dr. Phillips. "Some procedure or treatment that might help." The doctor exchanged glances with Director Halsey, who nodded slightly. "The princess has proposed an ancient Signian procedure," Phillips explained carefully. "It's called the thalamic resonance bond. According to Signia medical texts, it was once used in cases of severe genetic instability to anchor the unstable individual to a genetically stable partner." "A partner," Kane repeated, noting the specific term. "Yes," Phillips continued. "The procedure establishes a form of psychoneurological link between two individuals. The stable partner's neural patterns help regulate and potentially stabilize the degrading patterns of the affected individual." Director Halsey stepped forward. "Commander, I want to be absolutely clear here. This procedure has not been attempted in modern Signian history. It exists in their historical and medical texts, but it's considered a near-mystical practice from their pre-technological era." And, Phillips added, "it has never been attempted between different species." The Signia medical team is highly skeptical of its viability between a Signian and a human. "But Lyra believes it might work," Kane stated, making it a declaration rather than a question. "She specifically requested you," Halsey confirmed. "She believes your particular neurological characteristics make you a potential candidate. Something about your unwavering mental discipline and exceptional neural coherence." Under any other circumstances, Kane might have found a grim humor in those words. His rigid adherence to protocol and emotional control, traits that had made him both an exceptional security officer and a somewhat isolated human being, now potentially qualifying him for an alien medical procedure. "What are the risks?" he asked instead. Phillips didn't sugarcoat her answer. "For you? Potentially severe. Neural damage, psychosis, permanent alteration of personality structures. In the worst case, brain death. And the alternative for the princess?" "Certain death," Phillips replied quietly, "preceded by painful genetic degradation." Kane nodded once, decision already made. "When can we begin?" "Commander," Halsey interjected, "I need to be clear that this is not an order. In fact, as your superior, I would be obligated to advise against such an untested procedure with potentially catastrophic personal consequences." "Noted, Director," Kane replied evenly. "When can we begin?" Several hours later, Kane was escorted to a special medical chamber that had been prepared according to Signian specifications. The room was dimly lit with a specific spectrum of blue light that supposedly facilitated neural activity according to Signian medical tradition. In the center were two reclined platforms, positioned so their occupants would face each other. Lyra was already there, dressed in ceremonial Signian robes of shimmering fabric. that seemed to capture and amplify the blue light. Despite the dire circumstances, she maintained her royal bearing, though Kane could detect signs of the genetic degradation beginning to affect her. A slight tremor in her hands, a dulling of her normally vibrant skin. "Commander Kane," she greeted him formally. "I understand my medical team has explained the procedure and its risks." "They have," Kane confirmed, approaching the platform assigned to him. "And yet you agreed." It wasn't quite a question, but Kane could hear the underlying uncertainty in her voice. "I did," he replied simply. "Why?" The single word carried the weight of genuine curiosity. "After how I treated you when we first met, after I spat in my face." Kane finished for her with the ghost of a smile. "Perhaps because I've come to see beyond that moment to who you truly are." Lyra's silver eyes studied him with an intensity that seemed to peer directly into his core. "And who am I, Commander?" "Someone worth saving," he answered without hesitation. A complex emotion passed across Lyra's features: surprise, gratitude, and something deeper that neither of them had words to express. Before she could respond, the Cygnian medical team entered, led by a venerable practitioner whose elaborate body markings indicated decades of specialized study. "The procedure must begin now," the elder Cygnian announced. "The princess's neural patterns are approaching critical instability." Kane and Lyra took their positions on the platforms. Medical technicians attached monitoring devices to both of them, standard Federation medical sensors for Kane, more exotic Cygnian equipment for Lyra. "The process has 3 phases," the elder explained to Kane. "First, neural synchronization, which establishes baseline compatibility. Second, thalamic resonance, which creates the actual bond. Third, stabilization, which, if successful, will allow the princess's genetic structure to align with the stable patterns provided by your neural output." "And if we're not compatible?" Kane asked, watching as a technician prepared a viscous blue substance in an ornate container. "Then the process will terminate during the first phase, with minimal risk to either participant," the elder assured him, though something in his tone suggested he wasn't being entirely forthcoming about the potential complications. The blue substance was applied to specific points on Kane's forehead, temples, and the base of his skull. It felt cool at first, then began to tingle with increasing intensity until it bordered on uncomfortable. "This facilitates neural conductivity across species barriers," the elder explained. "Now, you must maintain as much mental clarity as possible. Focus on a single point of consciousness, a flame, a sound, whatever mental discipline technique you normally employ." Kane nodded, settling into the meditation practice he had used throughout his security career during high-stress situations. He visualized a single point of light in darkness, an unwavering beacon that represented his centered awareness. The elder began to chant in ancient Cygnian, a language distinct from the modern dialect Kane had heard Lyra speak. The sound seemed to resonate at a frequency that vibrated not in his ears but somehow directly within his skull. Across from him, Lyra's eyes were closed, her breathing synchronized with the chant. The blue substance on her skin began to glow faintly, pulsing in rhythm with the elder's voice. Kane maintained his focus on the mental point of light, but gradually became aware of something else in his consciousness, a presence, hesitant and alien, yet somehow familiar. It brushed against the edges of his awareness like a tide touching shore. Lyra, he recognized, though no words had been exchanged. The presence became more distinct, more defined. He could sense emotions not his own, uncertainty, hope, and a layered complexity of experiences entirely foreign to human understanding. Yet beneath these alien elements lay universal foundations he recognized immediately: courage, determination, and something that felt remarkably like affection. "The first phase is successful," the elder's voice seemed to speak directly into Kane's mind. Neural compatibility established. Proceeding to thalamic resonance. The chanting intensified, and with it, the connection between Kane and Lyra strengthened exponentially. The point of light in Kane's mental visualization expanded, no longer a single point, but a bridge connecting two distinct consciousnesses. Suddenly, memories not his own flashed through his mind. A young Signian girl standing before intimidating royal counselors, determined not to show fear. An adolescent princess training rigorously in combat techniques, pushing beyond exhaustion to prove herself worthy. A young woman accepting the burden of royal duty while silently mourning the normal life she would never know. In turn, Kane felt his own memories being accessed, the disciplined focus of his security training, the countless decisions weighing duty against compassion, moments of solitary contemplation amid the stars. Each memory shared strengthened the bridge between them, transforming it from tentative connection to solid foundation. The resonance is establishing, the elder announced in their shared mental space. Now comes the critical phase. What followed defied description in conventional terms. Kane felt as if the very structure of his consciousness was being rewoven, elements of his neural patterns extending across the bridge to intertwine with Lyra's. The sensation was neither painful nor pleasant, but profoundly disorienting, like simultaneously existing in two places, thinking with two minds. Through this deepening connection, he became aware of the instability within Lyra's genetic structure. He could sense it as chaotic patterns disrupting the elegant complexity of her being, spreading discord through systems that should function in harmony. Instinctively, without conscious decision, Kane extended his own pattern of order toward these disruptions. His lifelong discipline, the structured thinking that had defined his existence, now served as a template against which Lyra's destabilizing patterns could realign. The process demanded everything he had. Kane poured his entire consciousness into maintaining coherence, into providing an unwavering example of stability that Lyra's systems could emulate. Time lost all meaning as he focused solely on this task, aware on some distant level that his physical body was under immense strain. After what could have been minutes or hours, Kane became aware of a shift. The chaotic patterns were beginning to resolve, finding new configurations that, while not identical to their original state, achieved a sustainable harmony. "It's working," came Lyra's thought, tinged with wonder. "You're actually stabilizing the degradation." "We're doing it together," Kane corrected, sensing how Lyra's natural resilience was actively participating in the reconfiguration. The elder's voice returned to their shared consciousness. The bond is forming beyond our expectations. This is unprecedented between different species. Kane could feel it too. The connection between them was not merely functional, but evolving into something more profound. Their minds remained distinct, individual, yet permanently interwoven in ways that transcended standard neural linkage. "There's something more happening," Lyra observed, a hint of concern coloring her thoughts. "The bond is deeper than the historical accounts described." Before either could explore this observation further, the process reached its culmination. The intertwined patterns between them pulsed with sudden intensity, and Kane felt a surge of energy rush through their connection. For a moment, his consciousness expanded beyond normal boundaries, perceiving the entirety of their linked beings with perfect clarity. Then, gradually, the intensity receded. The elders' chanting slowed and finally ceased. The blue substance on their skin faded from luminescent to dull. Slowly, Kane became aware of his physical body again. The platform beneath him, the subtle sounds of medical equipment, the controlled atmosphere of the chamber. When he opened his eyes, Lyra was already looking at him. Her silver eyes held a new depth, a recognition that went beyond ordinary understanding. Her skin had regained its healthy luster, the tremor in her hands gone. "The procedure appears successful," the elder announced, studying the medical readouts. "The princess's genetic degradation has been arrested and shows signs of stabilization." But Kane hardly heard him. He was too focused on the extraordinary awareness that lingered in his mind. Lyra's presence, distinct yet integrated with his own consciousness. He could sense her emotions, catch glimpses of her thoughts, feel the rhythm of her life force as clearly as his own. "The bond," Lyra said softly, holding his gaze, "is permanent. Kane nodded, having understood this from the moment the connection formed. What had begun as a medical procedure to save her life had transformed them both irrevocably. They were still separate beings with distinct identities and wills, but would never again be truly alone in their own minds. "I can feel you," he said simply, finding words inadequate to describe the experience. "And I you," she replied. "Your thoughts are extraordinarily ordered, even for a human." A smile touched his lips, the first genuine, unguarded smile he had shown in years. "And yours are surprisingly emotional, even for a Cygnian." Their shared amusement rippled through the bond, creating a feedback loop of warmth that neither had anticipated. "Commander," the elder interjected, his tone serious. "While the procedure has succeeded beyond our expectations, we cannot predict all consequences of such an unprecedented bond. You and the princess will need to remain under observation for some time." The practical reality of their situation began to settle in. The immediate crisis had been resolved. Lyra would live, the dangerous genetic materials remained contained, and the Talanisian agents had been captured. But the political and personal implications of what had occurred were only beginning to unfold. Through their bond, Kane sensed Lyra's concern about these implications. How her royal family would react to her permanent connection with a human, how the various Cygnian factions would interpret this development, what it might mean for interspecies relations more broadly. He also sensed something else. Beneath the worry and uncertainty lay a surprising contentment, even joy, at the bond they now shared. This unexpected emotion mirrored his own growing realization that what had begun as a duty-bound sacrifice had become something he wouldn't wish to undo, even if that were possible. "We will face whatever comes next," Kane said quietly, speaking both to Lyra's spoken concerns and her unvoiced emotions. Together, Lyra's expression softened, the royal mask giving way to something more genuine. "Yes," she agreed, reaching across the space between their platforms to offer her hand, a very human gesture from a being who had once considered humans barely evolved primates. Together, as Kane took her hand, completing the physical connection that mirrored their neural bond, he reflected on the irony of their journey. From her contemptuous spit in his face to this profound connection, they had traversed an impossible distance in mere days. The future held countless uncertainties, diplomatic challenges, biological questions, personal adjustments to their shared consciousness. Yet, as Kane felt Lyra's determination and courage flowing through their bond, mingling with his own steady resolve, he knew with absolute certainty that whatever came next, they would face it as neither of them could have imagined when they first met. Not as separate beings from different worlds, but as partners bound by a connection that transcended all previous definitions. In the dimly lit medical chamber, surrounded by bewildered doctors and monitoring equipment that beeped with readings never before recorded, Commander Valerius Kane and Princess Lyra of Cygnus shared a silent promise through their newfound bond to transform what necessity had joined into something neither would willingly surrender.